In Washington, Secretary of State John Kerry travels to Capitol Hill today to try and sell skeptical lawmakers on the Iran nuclear deal. He's trying to keep Congress from passing legislation the White House fears could destroy a final agreement with Iran. A bipartisan Senate bill would give Congress an up or down vote on the deal and prevent the president from waiving sanctions against Iran during a 60-day review period. Our chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook is live with Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine who sits on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. Peter?
Thanks very much. I am joined by Senator King. Thank you for the time this morning.
Glad to be here, Peter.
Let's start with Iran if we could. What do you make of the Iran nuclear agreement as it stands right now, particularly since you're on the Intelligence Committee? We hope have been briefed on it. And what is your sense right now about whether or not Congress needs an up or down vote?
Well, let me take those one at a time. On the deal itself, I have to tell you, I was briefed sort of along the way as the negotiations were taking place. When the announcement came 2 weeks ago, it had more specificity and more bite than I expected. That doesn't mean it's a great deal or that I'm ready to sign on to it tomorrow. There's a lot of work to be done over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Nothing's been signed. There's no real deal yet, but the framework was frankly more favorable and stronger than I expected. So I think that's a good place to start. In terms of what's going to happen in the Senate and in the Congress, I think there probably will be legislation along the lines of that's been proposed by Bob Corker that gives Congress a role. These are congressionally imposed sanctions in the first place. Congress has to have a role if they're going to be rolled back. So the question is, do we have sort of a free-for-all in June, or do we try to set up a roadmap now that sets forth a rational procedure that has some protections about it not becoming a political football? That's going to be the issue over the next several weeks.
Over the next several weeks. The president has said, listen, I want Congress to have some buy-in here, but don't do anything now till we have a final agreement. That's one of the arguments we expect to hear from Secretary Kerry up on the Hill.
Well, I'm willing to listen to that argument, and I think many people are, but I need to be persuaded that there really is some threat to the negotiations. I see this as very different from the congressional bills to impose new sanctions, as you know, that have been popping up over the last year or so. I think that would have derailed the negotiations. I was very much against those bills. What we're talking about now is simply an opportunity for Congress to review the deal when it's completed. You know, I've got to tell you, I have some reservations about whether some of my colleagues are going to be able to do this in a responsible way, or whether it's simply going to be a bludgeon to beat up the president no matter what. I don't buy that, and if that's going to be the way it's going to be handled, I'm out.
You were 50-50 on whether or not this deal would be finalized ultimately just some time ago. Where are you today?
Well, I think 60-40. I think there is going to be a deal simply because of the momentum that's been built up, the reaction in Tehran, where the people of Iran obviously want to be rid of these sanctions. They want their economy to get moving again. So I think it's tough. I mean, there are skeptics on both sides. There are skeptics in Iran, and there are skeptics here, for sure. So it's not going to be an easy sell on either side of the ocean. But the way to analyze this deal, in my mind, is to say, okay, what are the alternatives? And the question is, could we impose our own unilateral sanctions? We've got to remember, this is an international deal, a community involving a lot of other major countries, and if they don't go along with new sanctions, it's not going to work. The whole thing collapses, and Iran's got a free path to a bomb. So we got to look at the options. I think there's a good chance it'll go.
Really quick, Cuba. The president's gotten a recommendation from the State Department on dropping Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Are you okay with dropping Cuba from that list and from warming relations with them?
Based upon the data that I've seen, yes. There's no evidence that Cuba's been in the business of financing or supporting terrorism around the country, around the world, at least not in recent years. I think it's time to make that change, normalize relations. If we'd have done it 25 years ago, the Castros would be an asterisk in history.
All right, Senator King, I'm going to spare you the Hillary Clinton question because we're out of time, but I pretty much know what the answer I was going to get anyway. Senator Angus King joining us here in Washington. Matt, we'll send it back to you in New York.